don't believe in the law of karma, listen to the following story. Watch until the end and draw your own conclusions about the values it holds for yourself. The professorial couple, currently 55 years old, has 3 daughters with stunning beauty, aged 25, 23, and 20 respectively. Despite being exquisite and charming young ladies, these elder sisters have yet to receive any marriage proposals. The professorial couple is deeply troubled, as many young men are captivated by the beauty of all 3 daughters, but immediately depart upon realizing that these great beauties never utter a word. The professorial couple belongs to the intellectual elite and affluent class, yet they do not believe in the karmic law. Successively, they gave birth to 3 mute daughters. Indeed, their spirits were severely shaken to the point of collapse. They were bewildered and devastated, their sorrow aging their faces. Despite their high education and wealth, they could not bring happiness to their children. The disabilities of these 3 beautiful daughters left people feeling fearful, concerned, and puzzled, yet helpless to offer any assistance. The professorial couple, now entering old age, are deeply tormented spiritually, with no medicine able to heal their anguish. Consequently, they are gradually developing an interest in religion. On weekends, they visit a suburban temple to listen to a Dharma talk by a monk. The venerable monk preaches about the law of karma. Good deeds lead to good consequences. Bad deeds lead to bad consequences. The law of karma exists objectively, and the Buddha recognized and clearly proclaimed it for sentient beings to be vigilant. Whether one believes it or not, all of our lives are governed by karma. Therefore, each individual bears responsibility for their actions, whether good or bad. Each person is the architect of their own destiny. If one engages in wrongdoing, they will inevitably face the consequences of suffering. The topic of the sermon that day was presented for the professor to contemplate deeply and confront his inner self. He suddenly recalled events from 25 years ago. At that time, the professor and his wife had been married for just 2 months when his wife became pregnant. The husband was overjoyed and drove their expensive luxury car to the picturesque coastal region for a romantic trip together. The car stopped in front of a spacious courtyard of a temple. The husband had just opened the car door when a group of wandering street children rushed over, clamoring and pulling at their hands for money. The professor despised beggars, not only refusing to give, but also speaking out to everyone, "We shouldn't give them money like this. It will only encourage them to avoid honest work and rely on begging, which creates a societal problem." Hearing this, the children dispersed. After attending the gathering, as the professor and his wife returned to their parked car, they discovered their beloved new luxury car had been deeply scratched from front to back. Furious and seething with anger, the husband immediately suspected the street children from earlier. Spotting a group of 13, 14-year-olds gathered under a nearby mango tree, he rushed over without hesitation. He didn't bother to ask who was responsible. Instead, he slapped each one and demanded loudly that they confess who had damaged his valuable car. The husband, seeing no one willing to confess, immediately threatened to take them to the police station. The children were scared, and among them, the eldest pointed towards a distant spot where a street child dressed in ragged clothes was begging from foreign tourists, accusing him of being the culprit. The husband, extremely angry, immediately charged over and forcefully grabbed the street child, dragging him to where his car was parked, while the other children took the opportunity to flee. In his rage, he violently slapped the child across the face and aggressively interrogated him about why he dared to damage his car. After a while, to his surprise, he discovered that the child was mute. The little boy kept gesturing with his hands and feet, his eyes teary with fear, looking very pitiful. The husband, unable to understand its language, believed it was because he refused to give money that the little guy harbored resentment and played dirty. So he infuriatedly kicked hard into the mute boy's chest. The little boy fell backward, legs flailing in the air. Next came fresh blood pouring from his mouth. People hurriedly ran over, pulled the professor away, and took the mute child so he wouldn't be hit again. The mute child was taken away, but still turned his head to glare fiercely at the professor, his eyes filled with resentment. Later, the mute child took refuge in a temple, and after suffering from a severe illness for several years, he became disabled. Everyone knew the mute child was inherently good-natured. The car wasn't torn by him. The professor wrongly hit him. At the end of that year, the wife gave birth to a baby girl. By the age of 3, she still couldn't speak. Then she gave birth to a second daughter, who also couldn't speak by age 3. Finally, she gave birth to a third girl. Just as she gave birth and hurriedly called the doctor to check, she found another mute girl. Afraid that if she had more children, the 4th or 5th might also be mute girls, she asked the doctor for a sterilization surgery. Now, every time the husband looks at his 3 mute daughters, he remembers the day he violently kicked the mute boy from years ago. He can't forget the image of blood gushing from his mouth and the terrifying look of resentment. Even now, recalling it sends shivers down his spine. He has come to understand and cannot ignore the principle of karmic retribution, which governs the universe. It's the fair consequence of natural law. For the cruel act 25 years ago, any regret now comes too late. Since then, every weekend, he and his wife go to the temple to listen to the monks preach and repent before the Buddha.